Hey, thank you all so much for joining another episode of Celeste the Therapist podcast. My name is Celeste. I'm a therapist, and I have a special guest who comes on once a month. I'm going to have him introduce himself to you all.
Hi, my name is Jermaine Morris, based out of Sacramento, California. I'm a certified coach and consultant, and my practice is based around a DISC assessment. It's basically just a test that shows how we interact with people, behavioral styles, communication, all that. And everything I do, I work under the premise of self-awareness without judgment.
Thank you for sharing that. And obviously people who hear us once a month understand that. But, I just want to highlight this idea of self-assessment, self-awareness without judgment. I feel like people don't realize how much the things that they're dealing with, even if it was in the past or even if it was their environment, how it is affecting them currently. And I think when they do come to that conclusion, they find themselves struggling with the grief of the time lost. What would you say to somebody that they've gotten that self-awareness and they realize they've been holding themselves back, which is the case for a lot of us? Like, what would you say about them dwelling on that time that they've lost from not knowing?
We were doing the best we could with the information we had at the time we were
Yeah.
going through it. So to say, oh, well, I spent 7 years dwelling on that, or I spent the last 3 summers harping on this, that's not really a productive way to all you're going to do is continue. Because if we realize now that I spent the last 3 years in a space that wasn't beneficial to me, so now I'm going to spend the next 6 months beating myself up over the last 3 years. All I'm doing is extending the time of something that is not productive or helping me get to where it is I want to get to. So just recognizing that we were in a space, that it was a time, it was a season. Okay, that's what it was. And now what can we do to move forward?
Yeah, that's good. Because it's something I think grieving process of time loss is something that we do sometimes. I don't think people realize like that's a grieving process that happens, because we only typically think about grieving when we lose people on earth, but we can grieve the time that we've lost and work on resetting. Every time when you introduce yourself and talk about self-awareness without judgment, I just think about just how powerful that is, but how hard that is as well for people to do.
Yeah, everything that we live in this society is based around judgment. So everything has to be good or bad, right or wrong, winners or losers. So if everything we do, we have to be able to put it in one of these columns. So was it good or bad? Was it right or wrong? Did I win or did I lose? So the default is judgment. But when we can shift to just is, like,
this is what it
this
is.
is just it just is. It just was the space I was in. This was something I was going through. This was a situation I had. Just is. If it's springtime and it's 70 degrees, it's 70 degrees. Now, if I want to say it's a nice day because I like 70, if I say it's too cold because I want it to be 100, if I say it's too hot because I want it to be 50, those are judgments. But if I just say it's 70 degrees, then it's just 70 degrees.
Yeah, that's good. I like it. Thank you for sharing that. And, for people listening who have never heard us before, if you go to CelesteTheTherapist.com/podcast and click on the link with Jermaine and I, you'll get other episodes where we talk about these different ways to help you work on like shifting your mindset, getting your mind right. And, when we talk, it's never about like judging or telling you what way to go or how to go. It really helps you think about, oh, wow, I didn't think about this. Let me check in with myself and think about, what do I need? Is this who I am? So that's what I love about the segment that we have. And so when I think about now, one of the things Jermaine and I do, he tells me like, what are we going to talk about today? Jermaine wants to talk about stress. And, we barely talked before about what we're going to talk about. But I love the fact that he pointed out that people we were at a standstill during the pandemic. And I did find, because I worked throughout the pandemic, I did find that people created ways to less stress, to have less stress, because they had no other choice. Things slowed down. What are your thoughts about like the pandemic and what it created for some people and their mindset for their life?
Yeah, because I worked during COVID as well, during the pandemic, and I saw the difference between people's stress levels coming into the pandemic,
Hmm.
throughout it, and then
Hmm.
coming out. And when people
Hmm.
came in, stress levels were high, and just from day to day life. And then there was so much uncertainty at the time, and so it was understandable. And then as the pandemic continued on, people started finding ways to deal with life. They had more free time than they've ever had as an adult. They were doing things that were more in alignment with their beliefs and their pursuits. They were, some folks had got checks to stay home, so they were just really doing what they enjoyed doing, and stress levels got down. Well, now that we're, a year back into plug back in, that I'm seeing repeat, like these stress levels are exponentially jumping back up, of people who are now getting reacclimated into, life and society and the systems, to the where when we're trying to deal with things, other aspects of our lives, trying to make changes, trying to, like you always say, shift the way that we think, we're using a lot of that bandwidth and mental and emotional space and energy to deal with stress, that we feel like we don't have it to make those other changes in our lives, because stress is just draining so much of the battery.
Yeah, that's good. And I do know you're right. At the top of the pandemic, it was obviously very stressful with the unknowns, and then people started to work on, dealing with what they had. And so I look at it, the environment kind of promoted people to slow down because you had no other choice. And I always think about the way I live my life and how it's unconventional than what society would say. I'm really mindful of my time, my bandwidth. I recognize society and how they market. There was the other day, I was on TikTok and I seen somebody make like this Asian dish, and that's all I was thinking about all day. And that's something innocent to like have that in my mind and then create it. But I think about all the ways when that happened, because I'm such a mindful person, I think about all the other ways that people are affected by uh things that they see, the marketing, how that message is just there, right? Like, I'm not enough. And so how we sometimes as individuals, we create our stress just through our thoughts. I don't know if people realize, like, you can activate your stress level not because there's something stressful happening in the moment, but because of how you are framing it. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah. It really is how we interpret what we're seeing. Kind of, there was a phrase, I don't know if the gentleman was with one of the social media things. He was saying how we don't see with our eyes, we see with our mind. That our eyes just take something in front of us, but our brain processes what it is we're looking at and what our attachment is to it. So depending upon where we're at, what we're going through, and how much bandwidth we have to deal with stuff, what our track record and our habits of, and behavior are, we can be looking at something and just compounding our stress, because we may be looking through everything through the lens of stress. Everything's another problem. Everything's another difficulty. Everything's another challenge. I can't do it. I can't take it. I can't listen. I can't answer. I can't respond. Like, everything, it just compounds on us, not because of what the thing is, but because of how we're interpreting what the thing is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I'll have people, and I'm such an energy person. Like, I feel like that's just a gift that I have interpersonal. I'm very, like, I can read people so well, and they'll come. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so stressed out. I was like, first of all, let's take a deep breath before you come and start anything with me. And they laugh. And I was like, I feel stressed because then once they start breaking it down, they'll come up with the solution. They'll be like, you know what? It's really not that bad. And it's just interesting as I sit with people and stillness, because if you come to therapy, it's intentional. Like, you're not mandated to see me, but it's just so powerful to watch how people, just watching them, their minds start to like come up with the solution. They slow down, and then they start to realize, like, oh wait, it's not that bad, but they created it in their mind. Do you ever find that when you're working with people?
A lot, because so similar, but I guess maybe different too. When I get somebody, it's because they've made the decision that whatever their current way of doing something is not working, or they think that it can work better. So they've already made the decision that I need to do something. So when that comes, there's a degree of openness to the idea. So then the first thing we do is, okay, how have you previously been doing something? And so, yeah, when they'll start to talk, and sometimes you'll see them working it through in real time about, I'm just so used to interpreting this way that I don't even think about if it even qualifies. Like I kind of liken to if you go grocery shopping and you buy a particular thing. So you're buying frozen foods or you're buying stuff that needs to be refrigerated. So you're just in the habit of everything that you pull out of your grocery bags when you get home just goes in the refrigerator. So it's the same thing if we just process stuff a certain way. But if you ever actually step back and look, all of a sudden the cereal's in the refrigerator, canned vegetables are in the refrigerator, dry pastas in the refrigerator. We're just used to putting everything in the refrigerator and then actually qualifying if it belongs there or not. So sometimes we just interpret everything as a problem. Everything is a challenge. Everything is stress. And we just process it in that way. And when we take the chance to actually look at what's in the bag, we find, oh, that's not what it is at all.
Right. The interpretation piece is important, to pause on, because the interpretation, I talked about media, like seeing that media is obviously a clear, it may not be clear for people in the moment, but people know how media can influence them. But people don't, your past can influence you, your family history, thinking about what people want, like what are those things that are part of people's interpretation that weighs heavy on people at times when they're like considering the things they need to do or their stress level?
Usually other people's narratives. So start off at home. We're processing things because this is how we watched other people process, or this is what other people told us it was. As a kid, man, life ain't nothing but bills and this and that, or all this adulthood is all responsibility. Everything's an uphill battle. The way people tell us things about life, we'll start to think, okay, well, life is hard, if that's the narrative we've always been taught. So we're looking for the hard in everything. Life is, you know what I mean? Like, so whatever presets we have, and then the brain is just looking for just proof. So okay, see, there's problems, there's struggle, there's challenges, there's this, okay. And we, like I said, we're just funneling everything through that because we're already operating under the system of this is hard, this is struggle, this is challenge.
And that hard part, I think about because I've had people over the years talk about like life is hard, and then a year later, 6 months later, of watching them, it's not like their life circumstances change. Their past obviously can never change, but the way they start to think about it looks completely different. And that hard piece, your mind does what it's supposed to do, right? Because if life was hard for you growing up, if you went through some things, your mind only knows hard, right? Like I have a Honda, my mind sees the Honda that I have everywhere, not because people went out and got the same car as me, but because that's what I see every day. And so like when I change my car, I won't see as many Hondas that I see if I were to change my car. And I think about the change that has to happen in order for us to not look at life under that stressful lens, is that we have to go in and give our mind a new narrative. If we don't, it's only going to keep playing the tape that it's familiar with, right? And so like because the familiar tape is hard, it wants to prep you and get you ready for hard. And it's looking for that and only looking in that lens. But if we start to do things different, think differently, which takes time, our mind's going to see that new narrative, like, oh, actually I could do this, right? If people are coming to session with me, they're not competing against their own mind, which only knows hard. They're talking to Celeste, the therapist, who is like very solution focused, looks at the barriers, but also looks at solutions. And so they start to look at it in a different way. Believe me, I don't know rocket science. I'm not a genius, but it's the way that I allow that the questioning to come into play that really helps people look at their situation differently. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's firm believer in information changes situations. So if you're wired based upon your preconceived information, your presets,
Yeah.
hearing new perspectives, talking to somebody, no, there's actually another way to see this, or
Yes.
even challenging with a question. Do you think this is the only way
Right.
this is the only way this movie can play out? This is the only way this can be interpreted? Well, I mean, I guess not. I mean, if it was okay, well, what about looking at that way? You know, and
Those
people will come up
questions
with their
are
own other
powerful.
narratives,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
you know. But a lot of times tying into the original point about the judgment is that we will lock ourselves into what, I can only do this, or I'm stuck in this mode. Oh, I don't have the luxury of looking at it differently like other people because I've judged myself to believe that these are the only coping mechanisms that are accessible to me. These are the only ways of dealing it for me. Oh, therapy is for them. Yoga is for them. Journaling is for them. The thought process of just having space to breathe, that's for them. Relaxing is for them. Like there's people we'll judge ourselves to the point to where we don't even allow ourselves the healing steps because we've already told ourselves that it's not for us.
Right, right. What do you think? Us telling ourselves that it's not for us. Part of it, obviously, it's like we've never seen it take place. We've never seen that narrative of us healing. And I feel like sometimes part of it too is like, is this really going to work? Like dealing with the devil, feels unfortunately comfortably uncomfortable than what you don't know. I think that plays this idea of me trying to do something different. It's very scary. There's fear in it. I think that comes into play. Like if we're stressed and we're trying to change our narrative and do something different, there's so much resistance because the old is fighting the potential new.
Yeah. And even finding even potentially problematic coping mechanisms, that can be the norm for where we're from. So if somebody comes home and okay, well, when he comes home from work, he cracks open a 6-pack to decompress from the day he had. That's his way of regulating stress. Okay, so instead of maybe dealing with the source of the stress, I'm going to drink every afternoon to deal with the stress that I had.
Right.
So that's familiar.
Yep.
Not the idea of addressing the stress earlier in the day or another way of dealing with it. It's that we'll mimic other people's coping mechanisms for things, and we'll think because I'm no better than them or I'm the same as them, so I'm going to do what they do. That makes sense?
It makes sense. I think about that cycle you just talk about because I think some people do have self-awareness. They see the cycle, but they have a hard time. Like you just mentioned 6-pack. They have a hard time replacing that 6-pack with something else. How would one do that? Like change that like narrative or like because I think when people think about change, it's like, oh my God, it feels so hard, so I'm not going to do it. Like, there's no way around the feeling part. So, like that's just going to be part of the process. Like, when you're working with people around like change and trying to do it differently, what kind of tips do you give them to help them like really work through it?
So sometimes backing up to look. So a lot of times we're treating the symptoms. So instead of looking at dealing with the symptoms, let's actually look at the source. And so if we're saying something like, so stress, results of dealing, like having excessive amounts of stress can manifest themselves in skin problems. Like you can break out, have,
Yep.
People say it's bad skin. You could have stomach issues. You're always having, indigestion or things like that. Issues with your pancreas. So you're having, insulin resistant stuff, tendencies towards diabetes, sleeping issues. Like there's all these kinds of things that can be the result of stress. So instead of saying, okay, let me deal with my skincare regimen, let me constantly pop Pepto-Bismol, let me do all these things for all the symptoms of stress, all these okay, well, let's look at let's back up. What's the source? And so talking to some people, instead of the 6-pack is dealing with the symptom.
Yeah.
So let's back up to where is this coming from and see if we can
Mhm.
start there, and then see if the six pack in your mind is even so necessary. Because
Mm.
a lot of us, we get married to our mechanisms. So it's now we're having the six pack if we had a stress day or not.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
so sometimes if I'm working with somebody, it's like, well, okay, I see how you decided to deal with something that was happening. But let's back up to what's actually happening.
Right,
Like
right.
what is the source of what's going on? And not just be so hung up on what are we doing about the symptoms.
Oh, yeah, that's good. I think that's going to help somebody, probably a relatable, like, kind of example, like maybe work.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a boss, but maybe you don't realize that boss reminds you of your overbearing mom, right?
Yeah.
And that would be kind of the source, but you haven't made that connection.
Yeah.
And instead, you check out when they're talking. You're finding yourself messing up. There's just so many different ways that we can be triggered. There's different sources that
Yeah.
may not even be about the boss, right? The boss
Very
may not
rarely
have
is.
been egregious or anything, but there's something in you that turns. Now your mind starts to overprotect you from when you meet her, because guess what? Your mind remembers how that overbearing mom was.
Yeah.
And so now it puts you in hyper alert. And you mentioned all these physical manifestations. And the issue with us, especially Black people, we die early of all these ailments, not because something's wrong with our body, but because our body is always living in a state of stress.
Yeah.
And that's not the way we were designed. We were supposed to like deal with the stress and get back to baseline. Some of us
Yeah.
haven't got back to baseline since we were kids. Your body is only so much your body can take. I've been hearing about way too many strokes and
Yeah.
different people breaking down at a young age. And I know it has to do with stress, but there's no way to create a study or a direct correlation to it. Like the doctors are not going to like come at it from that angle. But when I think about like us, especially the Black community, I think about like how we constantly live under stress by our thoughts. And don't get me wrong, like there are we're living in a country that was not designed for or created for us. So I get that part, but how do we like get into the moment and not allow, the fact of it wasn't created for us, but how do we not dwell on that and keep ourselves in that state? And I think that's the disconnect that people have and struggle with, because that's all they know is struggle.
Yeah. And I think part of it is our association in our narratives. So there's some of us who walk around believing we're supposed to be stressed because life is
That's so
stressful.
true. That is so true.
So we believe that we're supposed to be in the red because life is in the red. I
Hmm.
don't have the luxury of relaxing. It's supposed,
Right.
I got these kids, I got these bills, I got this. No, those are the things. How we're
Yeah.
choosing to interpret them dictates if we're in the red about them or not.
Yeah.
It's the same
Yeah.
with the eyes. Like we're seeing bills, we're seeing work, we're seeing child raising, but how we interpret them is how much that stress level is moving. And I think for so many of us, we're so accustomed to seeing so many people under high levels of stress that is the norm of what we think everybody goes through it. Everybody's this
That's
way.
true.
Everybody's stressed out.
Yeah.
Everybody's not.
No.
Everybody deals with these things. Everybody's got high blood pressure. Everybody's got diabetes. Everybody's got this, and this. All the symptoms that come with high levels of stress. No,
Right.
we're just all operating under the same coping mechanisms.
Right. Right.
And that's why it seems like it's the norm. So if we can say, okay, well, let me step back, um, all these joint issues and back where everybody got joint issues. And no,
Hmm.
like, like just everybody who's dealing with things the same way has these issues.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so because you're right with all the people having strokes and stress and high blood pressure, hypertension, all that stuff, especially in our community, it's that we have ways that we interpret things, and the way
That's
that we cope with the things the way we're interpreting them just exponentially put us in the red, trying to find a little piece of happiness. So I'm going to do it with this slice of pie. Trying to
right. Right.
find a
Right.
way to deal with the stress. So I'm going to do it with a shot of this. Trying to
Right. Right.
find, and
Right.
all the ways that we're coping with the things that are
Hmm.
stressing us out are actually
Hmm.
more problematic.
It's so true. Right. Like I always tell people mine was like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, partying all weekend, school during the week. And I think about how in our community, like that's more normalized than me saying like I'm gonna go to therapy. Right. Like, I mean, now, I mean, granted, therapy is a little bit more normalized in 2023, but
Yeah.
talking about your mental health over the years was not something that we normalized. And so we continue to create more stress because then I'm waking up hungover. I'm not the best that I can be at work or in school, right? My body's breaking down. The problem is still there.
Yeah.
And so as people are listening to this, I also want to be clear that if you see people like, if you look at me and that don't think that somebody's life is perfect because they've learned how to manage stress. Like life isn't perfect, but the difference with how I dealt with things then and how I deal with it now is that I actually deal with it. Right.
Yes.
I don't just that's the biggest difference. But let me be clear, like dealing with it is hard. I think becoming aware, as I started the session and with Jermaine, and I said, like self-awareness could be hard. It's a grieving, like, oh my gosh, I wasted all this time living in the past. You think about the past, you can't change it. Everybody knows that's a fact. Like there's no
Yeah.
back to the future in real life. Like it's a fact that we can't go back and change the past. It's like, so when we think about it, why are we continuing to allow it to affect us in the present? Because we don't know any other way. All we know is like, let me push it back. Don't talk about it. And so now we just kind of stay in a state of stress.
Yeah, and and for somebody who hears it, why that is problematic is because you're taking something from the past and you're making it, you're judging yourself in the present. And a lot of the things that we do when we're in that space of judging it in the present is making our future more difficult. Because if
I
you go out
agree.
and drink all day today because I'm upset
Mhm.
about yesterday, well,
Mhm.
I've compromised my immune system, my stomach, my heart, my liver tomorrow because I
Right.
drank all day
Right.
today.
Yeah.
So now I drank today because of how I felt about yesterday, but I'm waking up tomorrow with less ability to deal with whatever happens tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so if I didn't deal with today the way I dealt with it, I would be
Yeah.
better equipped to deal with tomorrow. But
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
judged myself today for what happened yesterday, I've tied
Yeah.
one hand behind my back for how I address tomorrow. And
Yeah.
if that
Yeah.
is the pattern of behavior, 5 years of doing that, 10 years of doing that, our body
Wow.
is just wearing down. We're burning the candle at both ends. We feel just
Yeah.
stressed out and just like, I can't deal with one more thing because of we've been judging ourselves for yesterday and we're not using healthy ways of coping today.
Yeah, that's good. And for people, I dealt with people struggling with gambling, substance use,
Yeah,
and I think when I think about, well, what's the solution, right? Because
yeah,
there's not like just do this one thing, but
yeah,
I said like it's going to be hard to change that narrative, get into the source, and when you're thinking about the thing that you're doing, I say like harm reduction model around, I've had people like instead of going out that night because of the stress, they stayed in. It felt hard, you right, like and they chose to do something different. But the next day they said, I felt so much better. Like I'm glad I didn't make that decision off of that feeling as we're because even though we're working through the source, right? Then we recognize what the source is, and then we have to look at how do I replace this thing that's not
yeah,
helping me, and without judging, because maybe the next day you decide to take that drink and it's like, okay, that's what you needed, that's what you had. But then it's like you're making a more conscious effort. You're not just doing it because this is just what I do. It's more like I feel like when your mind is involved in the decision, it makes it a little bit different as you're trying to decrease what you're doing as opposed to judging yourself for what you had to do to get by.
yeah, yeah. And I think sometimes so I think that, so the same way we work out physically. So if there's things we
Mhm.
wanted to
Yeah.
do that's going to require our body to be faster or to be
Mhm.
stronger or to do that comes from working out at least, semi regularly. So
Yeah.
then if something happens where we have the strength to tap into, our body has the endurance
Yes.
to deal with it. Well, the
Yep.
same thing goes mentally to deal with the
Yes.
mental and emotional things. There are exercises, there are things that we can do that better train us to deal with those things that happen the same way
Yeah.
it works with the body physically.
Yes.
So so at this point, you may still need in your mind, quote unquote, need the drink or need the certain way that you're coping
Mm-hmm.
while you're learning while you're exercising your
Exactly.
brain.
Yep.
And then all of a
Yep.
sudden you realize, okay, I've now I've got more strength. Lifting
Yes.
that 30 pounds last month was impossible. It just there's no way I could do it.
Right.
But now after working out 3-4 times a week, I
Yeah.
could throw 30 pounds around like it's nothing. Okay, so 30
Yeah.
pounds
Yeah.
is still 30 pounds, but where it
Yep.
seemed like it was the weight of the world last month,
Yes.
now I can lift it with ease and move forward. It's the same way in our
Yeah.
mental and emotional space when we work
Mm-hmm.
out and get those healthy ways to deal with stuff. It's still the same 30 pounds. Like the
Mm-hmm.
30 pounds didn't change. Rent didn't
Didn't
change.
change.
The car note
Yeah.
didn't change. Kids
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
change. But
Yeah.
when we work out on the mental and emotional side, we can deal with those things better.
Yeah, that's good. Another solution I'm thinking about as you're talking about the kids didn't change, the rent didn't change, the
Yeah.
job didn't change. That's another great point for people struggling with stress, because I think a lot of times we're waiting for somebody to change.
Yeah.
We're waiting for the job to treat us better. We're waiting for the partner to do this or that, and then you're stressing yourself out waiting for like this perfect outcome, instead of looking at, what can I do, what's within my ability, right?
Yeah.
Do I want to stay, do I just want to like look at this job as a way for me to pay my bills and leave and not get so invested in it the way I have been? Or do I want to change? Like, what is it that I want to do when it comes to this partner? It's not working out, blah, blah, blah. Do I really want to stay in this? Or am I staying in it because I'm afraid to leave? Like, am I keeping myself in a state of stress because I'm waiting for somebody or something to change? Like, it doesn't just happen. I think sometimes people are like, oh, I was hoping it, you can't hope into somebody changing. Like, it just doesn't work that way. And I know people know that logically, when you sit and think about it, but I think the way we are acting, we're acting as if we're hoping it changes a parent, the way they are, the
Yeah.
way they judge you, all of these things. I think that keeps people in a state of stress as well. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, you because every movie, every TV show, everything, it all ties into the end, and everything is fairy taled out.
It's
You
so
know,
true.
and so for some of us, we're just waiting for when's my day?
Right.
When does all of a sudden this thing just happen and the stars are in alignment for me? When do I catch
Right.
my break? When do I
Right.
have my opportunity? When do I have my moment?
Yeah.
And if you're sitting around waiting for that, now for some people, something may happen. And
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
but to me, that's the same as saying, okay, well, I don't even know how many lottery ticket winners there have been since they started the lottery.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody paid $2 and had a life-changing moment.
Yep.
And you can
Yep.
line up a bunch of people who said that was their reality. But think
Yep.
about all the people who it wasn't.
More than not.
Yeah. So if you're saying
I'm one of them.
supposed to be, I'm supposed to be the person to put $2 on it and I walked away with 400 million, that's somebody's reality.
Yeah.
But the probability of it being yours is probably not. So you might have to be a little more proactive.
Yeah.
And so there's way more people who had successful lives from making the changes themselves than people who've been successful because they lucked out and got a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
So when it's like, okay, well, if I'm just waiting for things to change, at least control what I can control. I can't control if the boss if they're gonna fire the boss and get me a supervisor I like. I've got zero control over that. But I do have control over how I interpret my interactions with them. I do have control over if I stay at this job or not. I do have control over if I'm doing the things, the workouts that put me in better shape to maybe change my career, to change my income, to be able to change my surroundings. I can make the changes on how the boundaries I want to enforce for the people that I choose to deal with and the things I want to be. I can make the changes in how I deal with stuff. Well, whether it be breathing techniques, whether it be journaling, whether it be therapy, whether it be exercise, whether it be, these are all things I can control over these situations.
Yeah.
And so instead of just saying, wishing or waiting or hoping for something that's out of my control, let me start with the things that are in my control.
I love that. And speaking of starting with things that's within your control, because with this today we're talking about stress and we've kind of defined it a little bit and what how it works, but now we're like thinking about what you can do. Also,
Yeah,
not looking at creating change only when you're in a stressful state, creating
yeah,
a routine around your life, even when stress isn't happening. As
yeah,
Jermaine used gym as a kind of analogy. Um, as people they don't go in one time or when they're stressed. Let's say they're trying to lose weight or they're training for a marathon or something. It's a consistent thing that they do, and so I know consistency and discipline can feel very hard. And so when you think about Celeste and Jermaine, like you're right, like I have been living under stress. Be mindful that intentional and discipline is going to have to be part of the regimen so that you're not only trying to be reactive with the stress, but more proactive. So you can have that strength to like go to those things automatically. It's easier for me to go for the hike or do something extra that I'm already doing because I do it on a regular basis because I know I can tap into that. It's
yeah,
hard to tap into something when you're in that state. It's hard. The clarity is not always like there. Does that make
yeah.
sense?
Oh yeah, yeah. A couple years back, it's always a story with me. A couple years back, I did this thing where I ran 6 5Ks in 6 months. They're all for different charities.
Okay.
Now, I'm not a runner. Let me preface it that way. Nor was I when I signed up for these things. And so the very first one, I was like, "Oh, it's a great cause. It's charity. It's for the city." Like, "Oh yeah, I'll lace up my sneakers, get out there that morning, I'll knock it out real quick." Oh, that wasn't the case. It was, you'd have thought that my shoes were sponsored by concrete. Like it was just, I'm out there in a real bad. I was in a bad way on that first one. I found myself getting angry because there were people out there who were in better shape, who were sprinting the entire thing, and I found myself getting upset with them. Like, what are they trying to prove? I'm out here for charity. You got me feeling bad about myself because you out here trying to prove a point. Yeah, we get it. You work out. I understand. You fleet footed. Okay, slow down. And so, because I didn't work out, I didn't practice jog, I didn't do anything. I just went into it cold, thinking I'm just gonna be me and I'm gonna be all right.
Hold on, I want to
By the
pause for
time
a
I
second
got,
because when we're stressed, we gotta be mindful. We're not like if Jermaine was blaming other people for something he didn't do.
yeah, oh no, I,
That
I
happens a lot.
legitimately was in my feelings about how better shape they were than me. And it was disrespectful because it wasn't even like an age thing. There were people who were substantially older than me who were in far better shape.
Yeah.
And then there were people who were substantially younger than me
Right.
who were in far better shape. So I
Right.
had issues with everybody. And this is and kind of what we're speaking about. This is my interpretation of what's happening.
Right. Right.
I'm
Right.
making what they're doing, I'm making it about me. I'm comparing myself to them and I'm making all these
Right.
judgments about
Right.
me. I'm looking at the
Right. Right.
situation
Right.
and now the 3.1 miles is still 3.1 miles. It doesn't change. But
Mhm.
my interpretation of the experience was everything through tired, exhaustion, anger, frustration, like all this that I created in my mind,
Embarrassment, probably.
embarrassed,
Embarrassment.
all that.
Yeah.
I created all these things for the 3 miles didn't change. But because
Yeah.
of my interpretation of it, because of all the judgments I placed on myself and the comparing to other people, and then I'm creating whole scenarios about who I think they are because of what they out here trying to prove, and like all this sort of, I created this whole world of fiction and stress,
Yeah.
which did not help me run any better.
Nope.
It gave me a little spurt of energy because when the adrenaline kicked up in my anger and my bitterness, I did run a little bit faster for about 20 seconds. But then I was that much more tired and exhausted. It was a whole ordeal. It was a whole adventure. And so, but what I had learned as each one went on, I then started incorporating jogging throughout the week. And
Mhm.
so from that first one, what I learned is coming in cold with no kind of workout regimen, no kind of practice or nothing. I realized, okay, so let me get out there twice a week, three
Yep.
times a week. So now I have a walking group with these men. We do a 5K every Sunday. So I do
Right.
3.1 miles every Sunday morning, and
Right.
we can do it. We in conversation, like 3 miles to me now is nothing, but that came
Right.
through repetition and consistency, and over and constantly working on it. And so the same way that we build our lungs up and our endurance up and our
Yeah.
stamina up to deal with physical things, there are things that
Mhm.
we can do to build that up with our mental and emotional state that does not have us out there hating the world when we're in the
Yeah.
middle of struggle, like I was hating
Oh,
the
yeah.
world in the middle of that first
Yeah.
5K.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's definitely common. It's
yeah,
easy, the ego doesn't want you to take accountability and look
yeah,
at it. And it's hard to do it in the middle of stress. But if you kept taking that approach, then the next few 5Ks, you just would have been doing it angrily, and
yeah,
stressing your own self out. It's what you did was like, no, let me look at what I can control. Like
yeah,
it just makes sense, and I think about us and just like the pressures that comes with life. It's okay to acknowledge like the feeling, the embarrassment, the shame, the guilt. Like, in fact, please acknowledge it, because if you
yeah,
don't, that's going to be the lens in which you do something or not do something. It's a feel like, I think it's important to understand, like it's important to pay attention to these vulnerable emotions, because they're trying to tell us something sometimes.
yeah,
Make them your friend and be like, okay, what is this about? What am I feeling? What do I need? As opposed to like feeling it and trying to stuff it back. You're not stuffing it, it's still in you.
yeah,
It's not going anywhere. And I think it's like we cannot outsmart our mind. We cannot. And I think the more that we educate ourselves on this, the more you and I are talking about this kind of stuff, it really helps people hone in and realize, you know what, let me deal with it. Because either I can choose to deal with it, or I can allow my mind to only know the tape of the past,
yeah.
right? Like, and not give it a new narrative and stay in a state of stress, which doesn't feel good. It breaks our body down. There's more reasons to do it than not to do it, really.
Yeah. And I think that if we find ourselves constantly duplicating, so with that 5K, if I didn't change what I did in between them, I would have relived the
Yep.
same experience 6 times.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us, we do that. We
Yeah.
keep reliving the way we interpret our job. We keep really reliving the way we interpret problems in our lives, because we're still doing the same thing
Yeah.
as we lead into these situations. So if I go into every 5K cold without training, without running, whatever,
Right.
I'm gonna be bitter every time I get out there, because
For
there's
real.
gonna be somebody in better shape. There's gonna be people, fast walking
Yeah.
past me with the stride, like, little kids with the quick step. I had all kind of bitterness that day. But if I didn't change the way I approached it, then the result was going to be the same. And so for us, if we're dealing with things and we're finding ourselves constantly overwhelmed, constantly stressed out, okay, well, what are some different ways that I can approach this? Because
Mhm.
obviously the way I'm currently going at this is not gaining me the results, or I'm not in the position or place that I want to be in.
Yeah, and we're creatures of habit, right?
Very much so.
And so that's why, if you feel like, but Celeste, Jermaine, it's really hard. We agree with you. It is hard because of just how much, we operate on habit and the way we've been conditioned. But also what is true is that we can reframe it, we can change that.
Yeah,
And it starts with our thoughts, right? And that's it's not easy. We can't see it in real time all the time. We weren't taught. So like your mindset around it being difficult, we want to say yes. We're not trying to sell you a dream or like this nice straight pathway to like understanding or less stress.
yeah,
But when you are in that state, kind of think about your outcomes and your goals. What do you want that to look like? And lean on that when you struggle with the discipline you're trying to create. It's like, you know what, like this doesn't feel good now, but I know like this is going to get me here. Like if you tell your mind to start to like, you know what, let's do this, right? Over
yeah,
time, it really starts to get in alignment with you. It gets in alignment with the direction that we're going because we're creatures of habit and we keep repeating cycles. Our mind's like, this is what we're doing. Now you're trying to do it differently. Your mind's a little confused. It's like, what are we doing? Like that's going to happen. It's going to fight you because it does. I use this example. I'm like, if you let somebody live in your house rent free and you all of a sudden, like 20 years later, want to charge rent, they're going to resist. They're going to have a hard time with it. And
yeah,
essentially, like your mind has been operating rent free without your involvement.
yeah.
And so the resistance is just part of the process, but it's not the end of the process.
Very much so. And I would say for somebody, I was like be solution orientated too. Something to try. if you're in the moment, because we've discussed before, like the emotion wheel and the importance of
Yes.
journaling and speaking to somebody. Something physically, because we talk about like how stress, how it has a lot of physical
Mm-hmm.
manifestations, is box breathing. So I don't know if you're
Mm.
familiar with box breathing. So
Mm-hmm.
think of it like if you're looking at a chart like a box. And so if you breathe in for 4 seconds, these are four counts. So if you breathe in, take 4 counts to breathe in, then
Mm-hmm.
you hold it for 4 seconds, you breathe out for 4 seconds,
Mm-hmm.
then you hold for 4 seconds before you breathe
Mm-hmm.
back in. So it's
Mm-hmm.
four to breathe in, four to hold,
Mm-hmm.
four to breathe out,
Mm-hmm.
four to hold, then take your next breath in. If you find that you can't get through those 16 seconds of that hold, what that usually means that there's a lot of clenching and intensity and your body's not open.
Mm-hmm.
So to get in the habit, like that's a tool you can start the day with. That's a tool
Yep.
that you in the parking lot before you get in the job. If you find
Mm-hmm.
your irritation level starting to get up, that's a way that can help slow down your heart rate, help open up your lungs, help
Yeah.
oxygenate the system, help bring your blood pressure down a little bit,
Yep.
and help give you a little more wiggle room for whatever it is you're dealing with in the moment. Because once we get like reactionary and the adrenaline's up and we get stressed
Yeah.
out, cortisol levels, like then we get really intense and really tight.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we start to feel those upset stomach, muscle cramps. Spending a
Mm-hmm.
lot of time intense and tight leads to the fatigue, leads to the muscle aches, leads to the high blood pressure, leads to those things. So
Yeah.
that's just a tool to just kind of like, let me take this count. Let me just breathe
Yep.
in for 4 seconds, hold it for
Yep.
4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, take your next breath. You do that a couple times, you can feel a release.
That's dope. And what Jermaine is talking about is something we have immediate access to, regardless of
Yeah.
our socioeconomic status. It's one of the underutilized ways that we can reset is breathing.
Yeah.
And I tell people we're walking around wound up and don't realize it. Like, and another thing, YouTube has free, like if you type in box breathing or breathing, or even a body meditation where it could do, they have ones that are like 5 minutes. My kids, like I started it a couple years ago. Now they come in like, let's time for meditation, because
Nice.
they realize like how it relaxes them and gets them like wound down for bed. But initially it was hard. They were like, oh, we got to do it. Now I'd be like, oh, like it's time for bed. But they be ready to do it, right? Because they gotten accustomed to it. And so for the box, I love, and when he talks about before you go to work or even take a lunch break, like it's something small. Instead of going on and scrolling on your phone, you can create that time to breathe. You don't have to go to a doctor to do it. It's easy for us to look at the barriers. It's easy for us to make excuses. It's actually harder for us to apply these things because the excuses and the barriers just confirm what your body already is used to, not doing anything for yourself, right?
Exactly.
So it's easy to stay in that space when people are like, why is it so hard? Because that's what your system is used to. The thing your system is not used to is you like creating that like space to be proactive and treat the source and not
Yeah.
allow it to get to a space where now you're doing these coping mechanisms that you're not proud of, or it doesn't feel the best, or you want to change, right? So that's really important. I appreciate you sharing the breathing part. That's really good and free.
Yeah, that's the thing too, because lots of we think of healing and we think of new things, and the first thing we think is monetary. I don't have the money, I
Yep.
don't have the
Yep.
resources. That's
Yep.
literally something you can do when you wake up. Like I
Yep.
said, if you before you leave for work, when you're in the parking lot at work, your lunch break at work, your boss getting on your nerves,
Yep.
kids got to talk to you, and we're talking about 16 seconds.
Yep.
And then you can do it like 2 or 3 times. So
Reset.
really taking less than 60 seconds out of the
Yep.
day to help reset ourselves to deal with the day better.
One last thing I want to say, because you said a lot of times when we're thinking about what we need, monetary comes into it. And a lot of times it's because, marketing and social media, they show you this like amazing like thing that can help something, but it costs $199.99, right? And everything's going up and we don't have money. And so that's why I even created this podcast, because I want people to learn ways that they can work on themselves even if they don't have the money. And when I had my second child and I wanted to like lose weight, I couldn't afford the gym. I didn't, even if I could, I didn't have time because I had 4 kids. And because I adopted my first 2, they were both special needs, so I have all these kids and no time, no money. So I recognized my goal, but then I went on YouTube. And when they would go to sleep, I would be in my living room and I would work out. I heard yoga was great. I couldn't afford no yoga studio. I went on YouTube and I learned so much yoga from YouTube. Right. So like for me, like I've always kind of had that mindset of use what you have, because I may not have known what I wanted all the time in life, but I knew what I didn't want it. So I went the opposite way. But I also did it even when it came to mental health and just being on different platforms and stuff like that. Like I wanted to help people. I didn't know what it would look like. I just started going on social media, putting up quotes about mental health, like because it was just a passion I had. I didn't think like, I don't have money for an office. I don't have this. I was just like, you know what? Social media is free. I'm already using it. Let me just create these quotes and put it up, so I share these little bits because I think people just kind of see the outcome of the journey. But with my journey, I started where I was and I used what I have, and it wasn't always clear. Like this whole Celeste the Therapist, even my name, Celeste the Therapist, I would go on Periscope to talk about mental health as my practice name, which is the Uniting Center. And people will be like, what's the Uniting Center? I'm like, oh, it's my practice. My name is Celeste and I'm a therapist. And because I got it so much, I just switched it to Celeste the Therapist. And that's literally how my name came about. And I just branded myself under that. So I admire people that have their kind of like process laid out. I didn't, but I did start where I was and use what I have. I've never been like a things have to be perfect type of person. And so like that's, I realize that's part of the barriers for people. But I promise you, there's a study they've been doing for years about happiness, or I forgot what it was, but it's in Harvard. They're doing a study. But I was watching this podcast, and one of the guys that's a part of the study, he said, they interview people. They're like 75, so they was there from younger. They've been a part of the study since they were young. And he said the one thing that people consistently say as they get older is that they wish they didn't care so much about what other people thought. And that's true. I hear that all the time as people get older. And so I really would challenge you, like if you're dealing with stress and thinking about what you need, using what you have, when you get to the source, try not to allow like what people think to be a part of the changes that you're making. Even if it seems like, people thought, I 20 like 12 or 13, I started talking about mental health before it was cool. And people were like, why are you talking about that? That's crazy. Like I got a lot of side eyes. I remember when I opened my practice in 2016 and I was getting my flyers out, and the pizza guy was like, oh, if I'm crazy, I'll let you know. Like, it's just like, okay. So it wasn't popular, but that didn't stop me, because I'm like, oh, well, this ain't for you. Like my goal is to teach people about mental health, even if it's not popular. So I definitely would challenge you to like be mindful about what's holding you back. And if it's people, know that like as you get older, you're going to wish that you didn't care. They put so much inventory in that part.
Yeah. Most of the people who we are concerned about what they think of us aren't thinking of us anyway.
At all.
So, what
At
they gonna think
all.
of me? They're not thinking about you anyway.
And if they are, I say people that put so much inventory into other people's lives, that ain't got nothing to do with them. They're just trying to take the spotlight off their lives. If you have that much time to be like judging and doing this, like you got a lot of stuff that you need to be dealing with. So,
and I'm a firm believer that people will give us all of their criticisms, but they don't have to live with any of our consequences.
Exactly.
So they'll give you every critique and comment about where you should work, who you should marry, where you should buy your house, and if it doesn't work out, they're gonna look at you like, well, it was your life.
I know. This was amazing. Thank you so much. I think that we covered a lot, and for people listening, like I would like to say, like, don't let this be a feel good like podcast. Like, take notes, go back, rewind, think about like the things that hit you and what you need to do, because it starts now. Like, as you know, people are like, oh, maybe tomorrow or next month or when I get my stuff together. It's like, just start now and not think about, not let the barriers hold you back. Like, yeah, now I go to a gym, right? Like I can afford it. And so obviously like I enjoy that environment. But then I didn't have it before. So was it more challenging to push myself? It was, but I kept the goal in mind. And so as you're thinking about what you need, like keep the goal in mind so you're not allowing the barriers to hold you back.
Very nice.
Jermaine, tell people how they can reach you if they want to work with you. I don't think you did that at the top of the segment.
Oh, yeah. So if you have questions on the assessment or anything, you can go to mykeystome.com, MYKEYSTOME, mykeystome.com. That'll give you more information about the assessment, the coaching programs, get you set up for a consultation, get you started with the test and making some changes. And as you say, shifting the way you think about yourself and about things. And every social media platform is at J Morris CEO.
Mm-hmm. You know, funny, shifting the way you think was something that came out of me saying it all the time, and I just branded that too. It's so funny how things just came together. So just so you know, people that's been following me for a while know, like I didn't have. I have clients that have this stuff planned out. I'm like, wow, you're so amazing. Nothing was planned out, but and it wasn't streamlined. So I hope that can encourage somebody to like use what they have and start where they are today.
Exactly.